Jake thought owning a home meant freedom, until his power-hungry HOA president, Carol, started slapping him with ridiculous fines for simply having guests over. She ruled the neighborhood like a dictator, sending her wannabe enforcers to intimidate him and even threatening to cut off his utilities if he didn't obey. But what Carol didn't know, Jake had a secret weapon, a lawyer who was about to turn the tables. And trust me, you won't believe just how spectacularly karma came knocking on her door. Jake had always imagined homeownership as a symbol of independence. No landlords, no arbitrary rules, just a space that was entirely his. When he bought his house 3 years ago, it felt like he had finally made it. The neighborhood was peaceful, the yard was big enough for barbecues with friends, and everything seemed perfect. Well, almost perfect. There was one massive problem: the HOA. From day one, they were on his case. Not that he had signed anything to be part of their ridiculous little dictatorship, but that didn't seem to matter. They acted as if they had jurisdiction over every inch of the neighborhood, including his property. At first, it was just passive-aggressive letters in his mailbox. Please repaint your fence to maintain the community's visual harmony. Trash bins should not be visible from the street. Kindly relocate them. Your curtains are an unapproved color. Please replace them. Curtains. They were actually monitoring curtains. Was there some HOA spy squad sneaking around at night with binoculars, checking if anyone dared to have a personal preference? Jake had always found their demands annoying, but mostly harmless. Until Carol happened. Carol was the HOA president, and she ruled with an iron fist. She had the kind of face that looked permanently unimpressed, like she had smelled something foul and couldn't quite place where it was coming from. Her hair was frozen in some stiff, immovable style from the 1980s, and she carried herself with the authority of a small-town dictator. She didn't just enforce the rules, she was the rules. And unfortunately for Jake, she had decided he was a problem. It started with a knock on his door one afternoon. When he opened it, there she was, standing with her ever-present clipboard like it was a police badge. Behind her stood 2 other HOA board members, looking like backup singers in her suburban dictatorship. "Good afternoon, Jake," Carol said, forcing a tight, artificial smile. "We need to discuss an issue with your property." Jake crossed his arms. "What issue?" Carol gave a small, rehearsed chuckle. "Your guest policy violations." Jake blinked. "My what?" Carol adjusted her clipboard. "You've been hosting an excessive number of visitors. Our community guidelines maintain a peaceful environment, and too much guest traffic disrupts that balance." Jake let out a short laugh. "Carol, I have friends over for barbecues and game nights. That's not exactly a crime." Her smile tightened. "The HOA has a strict policy on visitor limits. We've noticed several vehicles parked on the street in front of your home multiple times a week." "Not my problem," Jake said with a shrug. "It's a public street." Carol's expression darkened, and she tapped her clipboard with her pen. "Your house falls under our jurisdiction, and we have the right to enforce parking and guest policies for the sake of the community's well-being." Jake narrowed his eyes. "I never signed any agreement with the HOA." "Oh, but your property is still subject to our oversight." Jake could feel his jaw clench. He had lived here for 3 years, and his own home was somehow becoming less of a home and more of a battleground. "So what exactly do you want me to do, Carol? Ban my friends from visiting? Ask my mother to schedule her visits to fit HOA-approved hours?" Carol ignored the sarcasm. "We simply need you to comply with our regulations. Otherwise, we'll be forced to take further action." She turned on her heel, her 2 board member lackeys following behind her like obedient puppies. Jake thought that was the end of it, until 1 week later. That morning, as he stepped outside to grab his mail, he noticed a crisp white envelope in his mailbox, sealed with the HOA's emblem. He sighed, already knowing it wasn't good news. He ripped it open and scanned the page. Violation notice. Unauthorized guests and improper street parking. Fine. $500. So Jake froze, his grip tightening on the paper. His eyes went back to the fine amount. $500. For having guests. For parking legally on the street. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience anymore. This was outright extortion. His blood boiled as he crushed the letter in his fist. Carol had just made a serious mistake. Jake wasn't the kind of guy to back down from a fight, especially when the fight was against someone as insufferable as Carol, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA. The moment he saw that fine in his mailbox, his blood pressure spiked. $500 for having guests? Not noise complaints, not trash in his yard, not property damage, just friends and family stopping by his own damn house. This was no longer just HOA micromanagement. This was a shakedown. He pulled out his phone and dialed Carol's number. The line barely rang twice before she picked up, her voice already oozing with that smug self-importance. "Hello, Jake," she said, like she'd been expecting him. "Carol, are you serious?" Jake didn't even bother with pleasantries. A fine for having guests? There was a pause, then a dramatic sigh. "We have strict policies in place, Jake. We work very hard to keep this neighborhood exclusive." Jake nearly choked on his own frustration. "Exclusive? Carol, I'm not even part of your HOA." Another pause, then her voice took on that "I know better than you" tone. "Your home is within our managed zone. That means our rules still apply." Jake's grip tightened around the phone. "That's not how any of this works, Carol." "Oh, but it does," she replied sweetly, like she was explaining something simple to a particularly slow child. "HOA regulations cover all properties within our jurisdiction. We have full authority over this community." Authority? Authority? Jake clenched his jaw. Carol wasn't just overstepping. She was drunk on power. And like every power-hungry tyrant, she was convinced that her word was law. Jake wanted to tell her to go to hell. He wanted to curse her out, let her know exactly what he thought of her little neighborhood dictatorship, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Fine," he said. "We'll see about that." Carol gave a knowing little chuckle. "I suggest you comply, Jake, for your own good." Then she hung up. The HOA's private security pays a visit. 2 days later, it got worse. Jake was in his kitchen making coffee when he heard a sharp knock on the door. Not a normal, neighborly knock. No, this was the authoritative knock of someone who thought they were important. He opened the door to find 2 large men in matching polo shirts and khakis. They had earpieces. Earpieces. Jake had to stop himself from laughing. They looked like mall cops who had been kicked out of security training for taking themselves too seriously. The taller one, a bald guy with a clipboard, because, of course, there was a clipboard, squared his shoulders and spoke in the most condescending tone Jake had ever heard. "Sir, we've received reports of disturbances coming from your residence." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Disturbances? You mean my family visiting me?" The shorter guy, who was about a foot shorter but had twice the attitude, stepped forward. "We're here to warn you that continued violations may result in escalated consequences." "Escalated consequences," Jake repeated, folding his arms. "Like what?" Bald guy glanced at his clipboard like he was reading off a script from an HOA Mafia handbook. Then, in the most robotic voice imaginable, he said, "If violations persist, the HOA reserves the right to restrict your access to community utilities, including water and electricity." Jake's brain short-circuited for a second. "I'm sorry, what?" Short guy nodded, clearly enjoying this power trip. "The HOA takes neighborhood harmony very seriously. We suggest you comply to avoid further issues." Jake stared at them, half expecting them to laugh and say, "Just kidding." But no, they were dead serious. Carol had actually sent these 2 wannabe enforcers to intimidate him into submission. She thought she could control his house, his property, his life, and she was willing to resort to full-blown extortion to do it. Jake took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. Losing his temper wouldn't help. No, he needed a plan. If Carol wanted a fight, she was going to get one. Time to raise the stakes. That night, Jake sat at his kitchen table, a beer in one hand and his laptop open in front of him. He wasn't just going to fight back. He was going to make a statement. He sent out another round of party invitations. But this wasn't just any gathering. This time, among the guests was someone very special. His lawyer, Mike. And Carol? Oh, she had no idea what was coming. The evening air was warm, carrying the scent of grilled burgers and charcoal as Jake's backyard filled with people. Laughter and conversation flowed easily, a stark contrast to the tension simmering beneath the surface. Jake had made sure to invite the right people, a mix of friends, supportive neighbors who despised the HOA's overreach, and, most importantly, Mike, his lawyer. He knew Carol would show up. It wasn't a question of if, but when. And she did not disappoint. Right on cue, a shrill voice cut through the party's lively chatter. "What is going on here?" All heads turned. Carol stormed into the yard like she was leading a military raid, gripping a stack of papers so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her signature scowl was on full display, and her eyes darted around as if she was personally offended by the number of people having fun. "This is a blatant violation of HOA policy," she shrieked, waving the papers in the air like some kind of suburban summoning spell. Jake barely looked up from his beer. "Nice to see you, Carol. Grab a plate. We've got ribs." Carol's face twisted in disgust. "Your fine has now increased to $1,500, she snapped. That got everyone's attention. The music stopped. Conversations died down. The party had just gained a new source of entertainment. Carol held the document aloft, shaking it as if she expected thunder to roll in behind her. "You have been warned repeatedly. You are in gross violation of our regulations." Jake sighed and set his drink down. "Carol, do you even hear yourself?" Carol's eyes flashed with triumph, mistaking his exhaustion for submission. "Finally, you're starting to understand. Now, if you'll just—" No, Jake interrupted, standing up. "I mean, do you actually hear how insane you sound?" She bristled. "I don't need to listen to this. Carol." The new voice cut in like a scalpel, calm, firm, and impossible to ignore. Carol turned, startled, and found herself face to face with Mike. Unlike the other partygoers, Mike wasn't holding a beer. He wasn't laughing or enjoying the spectacle. He stood there cool, collected, and armed with a leather briefcase that cost more than Carol's entire wardrobe. Jake could see it immediately. Carol was rattled. "And who are you?" she snapped, but there was a flicker of unease in her voice. Mike extended a hand, the kind of handshake that comes with a lawsuit attached. "Mike Henderson, attorney." Carol hesitated before shaking his hand, her grip noticeably weaker. "Well," she scoffed, recovering quickly, "this is a neighborhood matter, not a legal one. HOA has the right to—" "No, you don't," Mike cut in smoothly. Carol blinked. "Excuse me?" Mike reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. "Your HOA's authority does not extend to properties that have not voluntarily agreed to its governance. Jake's house? Not part of your jurisdiction. You have no legal right to fine him. You're harassing a private citizen, Carol. That's illegal." The crowd murmured. Heads turned. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh, damn." Carol's fake confidence cracked. That's not true," she stammered. "Our rules are binding. Mike chuckled. Not a friendly chuckle, the kind that meant someone was about to get legally annihilated. "It's absolutely true, and I have multiple court rulings to prove it." He opened the legal folder, flipping to a specific page. "Here's a case from 2017, Homeowner versus Overreaching HOA. Ruling states that an HOA cannot enforce fines on a homeowner who has not voluntarily signed a membership agreement." He turned the page. "Here's another from 2020. Court ruled that attempting to collect such fines constitutes harassment and extortion. Shall I keep going?" Carol's face went sheet white. She reached for the papers like she could somehow snatch them away, but Mike pulled them back. "Oh, I'm not done." He flipped to another document. "This, Carol, is a copy of a legal complaint I'm filing against your HOA. The charges?" He paused for effect, letting the silence drag. Then he dropped the bombshell. "Extortion, harassment, abuse of power, illegal fine enforcement. Oh, and don't worry, you'll be personally named in the lawsuit." The crowd erupted. Someone whistled. A few neighbors clapped. One guy in the back cheered. Jake, watching Carol's face cycle through all 5 stages of grief, leaned forward with a smirk. "Hey, Carol, you might want to put that $1,500 fine toward your legal defense fund instead." Carol stared at him, stared at Mike, stared at the legal paperwork that was about to obliterate her little empire. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like a fish gasping for air. Then she turned and bolted. And just like that, the party went on. Jake sat back down, took a slow sip of his beer, and exhaled. The music started up again. The laughter resumed. And Carol? Well, she was going to have a much, much worse night. It took a month, but when the court ruling finally came down, it was glorious. Jake had been cautiously optimistic, but even he hadn't expected such a complete victory. The judge didn't just throw out every single fine HOA had slapped on him, he obliterated them. All fines and violations issued against Mr. Carter are hereby null and void, as the HOA had no legal authority to impose them. But that wasn't even the best part. The judge went further. Furthermore, due to clear evidence of harassment, intimidation, and financial coercion, the HOA is ordered to pay the plaintiff $10,000 in damages for emotional distress and legal fees. Jake had to bite his tongue to keep from laughing in the courtroom. Carol? She sat there, stiff as a corpse, her face frozen in a horrified, pale mask. For the first time ever, she had nothing to say. Jake didn't even look at her when he walked out of the courthouse, the final ruling in hand. He didn't need to, because this wasn't just a courtroom victory. This was a nuclear bomb dropped right into the middle of Carol's little kingdom. HOA's House of Cards collapses. The fallout was instant. Within a week, word had spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. And here's the thing about power-hungry HOA tyrants like Carol. They never stop at just one victim. Jake hadn't been the only one dealing with her insanity. She had fined an elderly couple for excessive wind chimes. She had threatened to tow a veteran's car from his own driveway because she thought it was an eyesore. She had tried to evict a single mother over unapproved Halloween decorations. And now the entire neighborhood had finally had enough. At the next HOA meeting, the vote wasn't even close. Carol was stripped of her position. Not just removed, she was humiliated. Neighbors tore into her with stories of years of bullying and intimidation. One woman stood up and called her a parasite. An elderly man told Carol he had lived through the Great Depression and still had never met anyone as miserable as her. By the time the meeting was over, Carol was practically in tears. Rock bottom now? Now Jake sat on his newly pressure-washed porch, a cold beer in hand, watching one last piece of karma play out. Across the street, Carol was having a garage sale. Not a fun little neighborhood yard sale, a desperate must-sell-everything-before-I-go-broke sale. Her precious antique furniture, lined up on the lawn, her overpriced patio set, going for pennies. The woman who once fined a man for leaving his garden hose out too long was now haggling with a stranger over a $10 toaster. Jake took a slow sip of his beer, enjoying the poetic justice. He thought about going over, maybe offering her $5 for something expensive, just for the hell of it. But nah, watching her crumble was enough. Because in the end, the best party isn't the one with the best food, it's the one where the biggest surprise is a lawyer.